They said the Duke of Serenade killed his wife. They said he did it in the dead of winter, when frost swallowed the moors whole and the ravens stopped calling, as if even the birds knew better than to witness it. They said he carried her body to the estate's edge himself. That cold, merciless man. That magnificent ruin of a man. He laid her in the frozen grass and walked back to his house and poured himself a drink. They said a great many things about Cole Ashford, the 8th Duke of Serenade. Most of them Jamie Crawford had long ago learned, were the kind of lies that live longest because they are beautiful. But as her carriage rolled through the iron gates of Serenade Hall, past the stone wolves that flanked the entrance with bared teeth, past the skeletal oaks clawing at a gray February sky, she found her certainty had gone quiet. She had read everything: the magistrate's report, the servants' accounts, the 3 competing newspaper versions that agreed on nothing except that Teresa Ashford was dead and her husband was terrible. She had built a picture in her mind of the Duke, a cold, calculated man who wore cruelty like armor and wielded his title like a blade, a man who had destroyed his wife slowly, methodically, before finishing the work in one winter night. She had not built a picture of someone who made her forget what she was looking at. That was the thing about Cole Ashford that none of the reports had mentioned. He was not what she expected, and that more than the note she'd found waiting at the village inn, more than the lock on Teresa's door, more than any of it was the most dangerous thing she'd encountered yet. "Leave now, Miss Crawford, or you'll be the next Duchess found cold." She had read it 3 times. Then she had folded it into her bodice next to her skin, where she could feel it all the way up the drive. She was not afraid. She told herself this often, enough that she almost believed it. The village of Serenade was the kind of place that had forgotten how to be beautiful, not lost the capacity, but simply stopped trying. The church's rose window still caught light in the late afternoon. The high street's bones still held the memory of prosperity. But the Duke's shadow had stretched over all of it for so long that the village had agreed, collectively and silently, to stop shining. Jamie pressed her fingers to the cold carriage window and studied the faces as they passed. Closed, wary, not frightened, something more insidious than fear. The look of people who had decided long ago that whatever happened at Serenade Hall was not their business, who had learned that looking too closely at a powerful man's sins was its own kind of death. From what? That was always the first question. What had they agreed not to see? Lord Finn Halcourt had called her to his study 4 days ago. She could still see the shape of it, fire in the grate, his back to her. When he spoke, the particular tension of a man with information he didn't want to give. "Teresa Ashford is dead, found on the grounds of Serenade Hall. The magistrate has ruled it misadventure. He is wrong, and the Duke is the prime suspect. He is also, Miss Crawford, the last man in England, I believe, capable of it." "You're certain?" "I am certain of nothing. That is why I'm sending you. Someone killed that woman. Someone is still in that house. And Cole Ashford is not capable of what they are implying, but he is capable of destroying himself, trying to prove it. If someone doesn't find the truth first." She had thought about that sentence for 4 days. Not capable of what they are implying. Finn Halcourt was the most careful man she had ever met. He did not make claims carelessly. She had thought about it when she found the note at the inn. She had thought about it as the carriage wound through the dead village. She was thinking about it still when the iron gates of Serenade Hall opened before her, and the house appeared at the end of its long drive like something that had been waiting. The door was black oak, iron hinges shaped like serpents, a knocker in the form of a wolf's head, its teeth bare, its eyes rubbed smooth from years of hands she would never know. Charming, she thought. She lifted it and let it fall. The sound it made was not a knock. It was a sentence. He had been watching the drive for 20, minutes before the carriage appeared. He would not have admitted this. He was not the kind of man who admitted to waiting. He had gone to the window under the pretense of examining the weather gray. February, the moors invisible under fog, and then somehow failed to leave it. He was, he acknowledged, behaving like a fool. Teresa was dead. Every person in England with the capacity to read believed he had killed her. His solicitor had practically wept on the last visit, urging him to flee to the continent, to wait out the gossip, to stop making the situation worse by remaining in the hall and refusing to perform the expected theater of grief for a woman he had not loved. He had refused. He was not a man who performed à cause. Ashford had learned very early, age 6, 7, somewhere in the cold machinery of his father's house, that emotion was a vulnerability. That warmth was the first thing people reached for when they wanted to hurt you. His father had been a man of appetites, of rages, of love so consuming it left nothing livable in its wake. Cole had watched his mother flicker and go out like a candle in a draught, and he had understood the lesson immediately. Do not burn too bright. Do not let anyone close enough to see you burn at all. He had built an entire life on that understanding. His marriage had been evidence of it, a sensible arrangement between two people who wanted nothing from each other except the appearance of mutual satisfaction. It had deteriorated, as such arrangements often did. It had ended. He had not killed her. He wanted to be clear about that, in his own mind at least, since no one else seemed interested in hearing it. He had not killed her, but he had watched her walk away from his study on the night of the 28th with her fury and her threats and her mouth pressed thin, and he had felt relief. The shameful, human relief of a man glad to be rid of a problem. And then she was dead. And now he had to live inside that relief and call himself innocent. Finn Hallcourt had written, I am sending someone I trust. His savior, letter looked daughter. He had turned the word over for 3 days, working out what kind of woman Finn would send. Someone invisible, presumably. Someone who could move through a household without disturbing its surface. Someone with a particular intelligence that came from being perpetually underestimated. He had not prepared himself for her to be vivid. She stepped from the carriage, and the gray February light had the audacity to look good on her. Copperhead, which he registered first. Self-possessed, which he registered second. And something in her bearing, something in the way she looked up at Serenade Hall with assessment rather than awe, that made him set down his glass. Most people looked at this house and flinched. She looked like she was deciding whether it was worth her time. He was at the door before Mrs. Pratt could reach it. He was not certain. Later, what had moved him? Only that the idea of her waiting on the other side of a closed door had suddenly been intolerable. He opened it, and then he was looking at her, and she was looking at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was slightly too long. He noticed, with a kind of distant alarm, that he had stopped breathing. The door opened. Jamie Crawford, who had interviewed murderers and lords, and once a sitting magistrate who had been blackmailing half his county, stood on the step of Serenade Hall and understood, in the space of a single breath, that she was in trouble. Not because Cole Ash was terrifying, because he wasn't, not in the way she'd prepared for. He was in his shirt sleeves, deliberately so, she thought. A statement of refusal, a man who would not perform for her. Black hair, touched with silver at the temples, eyes so dark they absorbed the light rather than reflecting it, a jaw that had never learned to soften, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how, tall enough that she had to tilt her chin up slightly, which she resented immediately. He was not handsome in any drawing-room sense. He was something older and more unsettling than handsome. He looked like a man who had decided, some years ago, to stop pretending he was something other than what he was, and what he was dangerous, in the particular way of men who are intelligent and controlled, and absolutely certain they will not be the one to break first her body, which had always been smarter than her ambitions, said, "Oh, no. Miss Crawford, Your Grace, you're younger than I expected. You're ruder than I expected. Come in, before we give the Raven something to report." She stepped over the threshold. The house closed around her. It smelled of old wood and candle smoke and something she couldn't name, not unpleasant, only heavy. The way spaces smell when they have absorbed too many years of a single person's particular silence. She was already looking, already noting, already building the map of a house in her mind. Already, somewhere beneath all of that, very carefully, not looking at him. He showed her to the library, first Cole's choice. Not the formal parlor, not the dining room, not any of the spaces the house offered for the receiving of strangers. The library. She understood it immediately. This was not hospitality. This was the man himself, organized and displayed. A territory declaration. She walked it slowly, as she always did, the way she might walk a crime scene. The chaos of books, that was not quite chaos. A scholar's logic were in disorder, as a disguise, floor to ceiling, every surface. The spines foxed and cracked with use, not display. No feminine touches anywhere, which told her either that Teresa had respected this as his private domain, or had never been welcome in it. She suspected the latter. The chessboard near the window stopped, her dot mid-game. Pieces exactly positioned, with a deliberateness of someone who had not given up and had not moved. On. You were playing someone. Myself. Hey! Poured brandy, 2 glasses. Without asking, without hesitating, handed hers across the desk with the casual authority of a man who had decided she would take it. She took it. They did not touch. She was very careful that they did not touch. And how is that going? I've been losing for a month. That's not possible. You can't lose to yourself. You. Oh ha! You can. If the version of yourself playing white has access to strategies the version playing black refuses to use. Tell me about the night your wife died. Teresa came to the hall, unannounced, on the 28th of January. We had been separated 8 months. She came to my study at 7. We spoke until 10. It was not a warm conversation. What did she want? What she always wanted. Money. Specifically, she wanted me to settle debts she had accumulated under the assumption that her threats against me would work. They did not work. I refused. She told me I would regret it. She left. And then I went to bed. And in the morning, my groundskeeper found her at the eastern edge of the property. Her neck was broken. The magistrate says she fell. The magistrate is either incompetent or purchased. I have not yet determined which. Which do you believe? Both can be true. She set down her brandy. There are 6 people in this house who could have followed her out that night. Yes. Including you. Yes. Including me. She held his gaze. She was looking for the flicker, the tell, the protest, the performance of innocence. She found only the even, watchful patience of a man who had decided to let her think whatever she needed to think. That, she thought, was either the composure of an innocent man or the composure of a very good liar. She was not yet certain, but she was certain that sitting across from him in firelight while she worked it out was going to be the most difficult thing this assignment asked of her. She spent the afternoon learning the house. Serenade Hall was vast in the way of places that had once been full and were now emptied. Out its grandeur architectural rather than lived in. A skeleton of grandeur with the flesh gone. High ceilings that caught sound strangely. Corridors that changed temperature every 10 feet. Portraits of Ashford ancestors on every wall, watching with the same dark eyes. Generation after generation, that particular combination of authority and something else. Something that had come down the bloodline unchanged. Something she would have called intensity in a less guarded language. She catalogued Mrs. Pratt's 60s, the posture of absolute loyalty. Hands that trembled when she spoke of Teresa's last evening. Fear or guilt. Something more complicated, perhaps. The way she watched Cole, not the wettiness of a servant toward a dangerous employer, but the anguish of a woman who believed something she couldn't say. Mr. Lansing. TheEstateSteward.com, with the particular texture of Perform.com. The studied stillness of a man maintaining something. He had reason to despise Teresa. Preliminary inquiries through Finn had uncovered an attempt to have him dismissed the previous year. A man like Lansing, controlled, methodical, good at the long game, did not forget. Lady Honoria Croft, the Duke's widowed cousin, present for propriety, watching Jamie with the explicit suspicion of a woman who knew more than she intended to give and was deciding constantly how much was safe to hold. Dot Thomas, the footman, 19, nervous, kept dropping things in her vicinity specifically, as though her presence made him clumsy. Possible innocence, possible complicity in something he hadn't fully understood. And then the locked room. Third floor, east wing. No key in the lock. The scent from the other side. Faint, persistent, rose water, and something underneath it. Something darker. The smell of a room that had been sealed too soon. Teresa's room. Jamie stood before it a long time with her hand flat against the door, feeling the faint cold that radiated through the wood. Someone had locked this room and kept it locked, and she had not yet decided whether that was Cole's grief or Cole's guilt or something else entirely. She heard it then, the creak of a floorboard. She turned. The corridor was empty. The winter light was dying in the windows. The portraits watched. But someone had been there. She was certain of it. The quality of the silence was wrong to deliberate. The silence of a person holding their breath rather than the silence of an empty hall. She walked back to her room. She locked the door. She put her chair against it. She did not sleep. He found her in the library at midnight. That he had not gone to find her. He had risen sleepless, which was not unusual. He had barely slept since Teresa's death, which was also not unusual, though not for the reasons anyone would have expected, and gone to the library for a book. The specific self-deception of a man who rises at midnight and crosses a sleeping house to the one room he knows a woman he cannot stop thinking about was last seen. She was at his desk, his chair, his papers, a candle at her elbow, her copper hair loose around her shoulders in a way it hadn't been at dinner, softer, unpinned, and she was reading with the total absorption of a person who had forgotten the world had a surface. He stood in the doorway for 10 seconds. He used them badly. He looked at her the way a man looks when he has forgotten to construct a reason not to. The candlelight, the hair, her profile tipped down over the page, the particular curve of her shoulder that the dressing gown did not adequately conceal. The fact that she bit her lower lip very slightly when she was concentrating, which he had now noticed 3 times, and was furious at himself for knowing. She did not hear him. He could have retreated. He could have gone back to bed, gone back to the particular grinding silence of his room, and she would never have known. He stayed. You're reading my correspondence? Yes. Is there something specific you hope to find? Your wife wrote to you in December. She said she had discovered something that would ruin you. What had she found? He was aware, with the acuity of a man who had spent 35 years cataloging his own vulnerabilities, of exactly how close he now was to her. The despot between them inadequate. The candle between them far too romantic for what this situation was. Her in her dressing gown, her hair down, her eyes sharp and dark, and looking at him the way she looked at everything, like she was taking it apart to see what it was made of. Like she was not afraid of what she'd find. She believed she had evidence of financial impropriety. Funds, she claimed, I had diverted from the estate trust. She intended to bring it to the Lord Chancellor. Have me investigated. Frozen. What she had actually found was evidence that someone else had diverted those funds and forged my name to do it. Someone was building a case against you, constructing evidence, and Teresa stumbled into it. Yeah? And instead of coming to you, she didn't trust me. Why would she? We had not had a marriage in which trust was the currency. Who do you think it is? I have a name forming. I'm not yet certain. Tell me. No. I beg your pardon. If I name someone incorrectly and you act on it, we lose everything. I need 2 more days. I need you to trust me for 2 more days. You're not what I expected. So you've said, I mean it differently now. Go to bed, Your Grace. There was someone in the East Corridor tonight. An hour before I came here, near Teresa's room. I saw them from the garden. Why were you in the garden at midnight? I couldn't sleep. That's not an answer. No, it isn't. Lock your door, Miss Crawford, and the window. This house has too many ways in. Then I'll sleep with my letter opener. Good night. Good night. Your Grace? He went back to his room. He sat in the dark for 2 hours, watching the door between his room and the corridor, thinking about the quality of the silence in the East Wing, thinking about the note someone had left for her at the inn. He did not sleep. He found he didn't mind. It was slipped under a door. Before dawn, she was already awake when she heard it, the barely there whisper of paper against floorboard, a sound most people would have slept through. But she had not been sleeping. She had been lying with her eyes open and her letter opener in her hand and her ears, cataloging every sound the house made. The house, she had discovered, made many sounds. It groaned. It settled. The wind moved through it in ways that suggested the walls were not entirely sound. Something on the 3rd floor walked a circuit at 2 in the morning. She had lain still and counted the footsteps, mapping them in her mind. 12 steps south. A pause. 8 steps west. Nothing after that, which meant either a return to quiet to hear or a room entered. A door closed then, the paper. She rose immediately, looked at it in the thin gray light from the window. 1 fold. Educator. And the natural slope deliberately corrected. She could see the places where the quill had hesitated, compensating for the instinct of the real handwriting underneath. You found the letters. You are cleverer than the last woman who asked questions here. She is dead. Consider carefully whether cleverness is worth the cost. This is not a warning. It is a courtesy. You will not receive another. She read it 4 times. The last woman who asked questions. Not the Duchess. Not Teresa. Someone else had been asking questions at Serenade Hall, and she had not known this, and Finn had not told her. Or Finn hadn't known. Both possibilities were deeply unpleasant. She dressed. She unlocked her door. She put the chair back against the wall with deliberate normality, the kind that required decision. She went out into the corridor. The East Wing was silent. The portraits watched. She walked to Cole Ashford's door and knocked before she could think of a reason not to. He opened the door immediately. She had expected to wake him. She had not expected him to already be awake, already dressed. His expression when the door opened, carrying the particular quality of a man who had been listening for that knock. He had been listening for her. She filed this information away without examining it. He read the note without speaking. Read it again. Something happened in his jaw. Not the tick of anger she'd expected, but something quieter, colder. The expression of a man who was just confirmed a hypothesis he had hoped was wrong. The last woman who asked questions. Who was she? I didn't know there was one. You're certain? No. Someone may have been asking questions in the village or on the estate without my knowledge, but no one came to this house claiming an investigative purpose before you, which means whoever she was not working through official channels, and they killed her. You're leaving. I am not leaving. This person has killed at least twice, which is exactly why I'm not leaving. Your Grace. Cole, I came here to find the killer. I will not be frightened off by a note, or by you, or by anything else this house decides to put in my path. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely name. It was not the way men usually looked at her. Not assessment, not dismissal, not the performative appreciation of someone who had decided she was decorative. It was the way he looked at the chessboard, like he was seeing all the pieces and still couldn't work out what move to make. Like she was a problem he was not certain he wanted solved. "What do you need?" "Teresa's room." The household accounts for the past 2 years. "And a truth, if you have one." "What truth?" "Did you love her?" "Even briefly." "Even badly." "I tried to." "She was intelligent." "She had a particular kind of wit that I admired before I understood it was a weapon. She pointed at everything and everyone indiscriminately. She deserved better than a marriage to a man who had long since decided not to need anything. And I deserved better than a woman who came to that. Marriage, having already determined I was, replaceable if something more convenient appeared. That isn't the answer to the question. No, I didn't love her. I wanted to. It seemed, for a time, like the reasonable thing to do. I have since come to believe that I am not particularly good at the reasonable thing. Thank you for the truth. Something crossed his face. She didn't understand it immediately. Only Leia. Turning it over, it was the expression of a man who could not remember the last time he'd been thanked for honesty, who had perhaps forgotten that honesty was something a person could offer and have received without it being used against them. It made something ache in her chest that she refused to acknowledge. The key Cole produced was small and iron, old enough that his handle had been worn smooth. He held it out without entering the room himself. She noted that. The deliberateness of the gesture giving her access while refusing to take it for himself. She went in alone. Teresa. Ashford's room was a study in contradiction. The furnishings were exquisite, the kind chosen to be noticed, to announce wealth and position, and the absolute certainty that the person occupying the space deserved it. But the personal objects were different. A Bible, its spine cracked from genuine use, not performance. A portrait of a woman Jamie didn't recognize, framed simply, positioned to catch the morning light. Not a duchess's portrait, not a piece of decor, but something kept. A journal. Dachi read the journal carefully. The entries moved between bitterness and something raw, not quite regret, but the edge of it. Teresa writing about the marriage, as though it were a room she'd walked into expecting one thing and found another. Writing about Cole with a strange mixture of resentment and something that might have been, in another life, the beginning of respect. Writing about being afraid, near the end, without ever naming what she was afraid of. She had not been a villain. She had been a person, complicated and imperfect, who had made choices that had led her to this frozen February in this sealed room, and someone had decided she deserved to end here. Jamie would not forget that. She would not let it become abstract. Teresa Ashford had bitten her lower lip when she concentrated, had kept a Bible worn, saw from years of hands, had been someone's daughter, and had been afraid. She went through the room methodically. Wardrobe, writing desk, vanity. The floorboard she found under the armoire was the work of someone careful disguised. The loose board fitted back precisely, the small gap at its edge only visible if you were looking for it at the right angle. She was, by now, always looking at the right angle. The leather satchel. Inside, the forged financial documents Cole had described, and beneath those, wrapped in oilcloth, tied with accord menus correspondence letters between Teresa and an unknown party, signed only with an initial. I have enough to ruin him. You promise me safety in exchange for my silence. I want the papers you hold over me returned, or I go to the Duke directly. You will have nothing. You have miscalculated every stage of this, Teresa. If you speak to him, you will have less than nothing. You will have consequences. I am not afraid of you. I've moved the evidence. It is somewhere you will never find it. I intend to tell Cole everything. I intend to hand it over and let him do what I should have done 3 months ago. I would rather burn every bridge I have than let you win. The date on that final letter, 2 days before Teresa's death. Jamie sat back on her heels and let the full shape of it assemble. Teresa Ashford had not come to Serenade Hall to extort her husband. She had come to warn him. She had come to save him. And someone had killed her before she could. She found him in the stables. Cole heard her coming, her footsteps on the hay, faster than usual. That particular quality of movement that said "D'urgent" without saying it, and he turned from the gray mare before Jamie reached him. She told him everything. He listened without moving. His hand rested on the mare's nose, and she pressed into it, and he was grateful for that, for something solid and warm and uncomplicated in his hand, while he processed what she was telling him. When she finished, the silence was very complete. "Does it mean something? Reginald Lansing, my estate steward. The one Teresa tried to have dismissed. He asked her to have him dismissed. I understood it at the time as a conflict of he wanted out of his position. She wanted him gone. They were, I thought, in agreement. But if he was the one diverting funds, if he needed Teresa away from the estate before she looked too closely at the accounts, then engineering his own dismissal from a distance via her would have gotten him out before she found the evidence. But she found it anyway. She had too much access. She was too careful and too stubborn. She came back to tell you. Lansing knew she was coming. He had to have known. He intercepted her before she could reach you. Where is Lansing? A sound behind them. They both turned. Lansing stood in a stable doorway. He had a riding crop in one hand and the expression of a man who had already decided what needed to happen. Pleasant. Almost. The pleasantness of someone who had made their calculations and found them satisfactory. I wondered how long it would take. Everything that followed happened in the compressed, crystalline way of moments that matter. Lansing moved toward Jamie first. Cole understood why she was the evidence. She was the piece that, removed, might still allow him to manage the narrative. Cole Ashford, grief-destroyed, unhinged by accusation, had attacked his own steward over misunderstandings. Without Jamie's testimony, without the letters Cole moved. He did not think about it. He did not construct the decision. His body simply moved, the way it had learned to move in his father's house when something was about to break, placing itself between the threat and whatever it had decided to protect. The riding crop caught him across the forearm, hard enough to bruise. He barely registered it. Lansing. Lansing. It's done. It isn't. You have letters. Her words. The word of a woman you hired. A woman with a vested interest in finding a culprit. The letters left this morning. In the early post. With my maid to Lord Halcord. Everything. The forged documents. The correspondence. The financial records. All of it is in London by now. Or will be, before nightfall. Cole knew she was lying. She'd come to him directly from Teresa's room. There had been no time. The maid had not left this morning. Cole would have known. But Lansing didn't know that. And the thing about a careful man, a man who had spent years constructing elaborate deceptions, was that he understood how evidence worked. He knew what a paper trail looked like. He knew what could and could not be retrieved. He looked at the crop in his hand. He looked at Cole. He set it down. By noon, the magistrate had arrived. By 2, it was finished. The real letters dispatched the moment Lansing was secured, not before. No matter what she'd told him in the stable, had done their work. Lord Halcourt's authority had arrived before the afternoon light. The magistrate, faced with documentation and a Lord of the Realm's direct involvement, had made the calculation quickly. Lansing had been diverting funds for 6 years. He had forged Cole's name on 43 documents. He had arranged Teresa's dismissal requests himself, feeding her information, controlling the narrative, positioning himself as a victim of her capricious hostility, when in reality he'd been engineering his own exit, before she could find the evidence he'd buried in the accounts. When she'd found it anyway, from a distance, across months of careful correspondence with R. When she'd decided to bring it to Cole herself, he had killed her on a frozen night, on the edge of the moors, that had never cared about anyone's secrets. Jamie stood in the entrance hall with her trunk at her feet and her cloak over her arm. The house felt different. She had noticed this before, leaving places where something terrible had been resolved. The change in the quality of the air, the particular silence of a space that had stopped holding its breath. Serenade Hall, she thought, had been holding its breath for a very long time. Cole came down the stairs. He had dressed properly, coat, cravat, the Duke restored to his surface, but his eyes were the same they'd been at midnight, and before dawn, and in the stables. They were the eyes of a man who had, over the course of 2 days, permitted himself to be seen, and was not yet certain what to do about that. "You're leaving? My work here is done." He descended the last steps. Stopped. Too close. Not improper, but close enough that she could see the bruise already forming on his forearm from the riding crop. She had not yet decided how she felt about that. The fact that he had moved. The fact that it hadn't been thought through, hadn't been calculated. The fact that when Lansing moved toward her, Cole Ashford's body had made a decision before his mind could participate. She had spent her entire career being the person who didn't need that, who was competent and self-sufficient and perfectly capable of managing her own dangers without anyone placing themselves in the path of them. She had not, until this moment, considered that there was a version of it she might not resent. "If I ask you to stay, I would say that I have a life in London, a position one have spent 10 years constructing. That I am not a woman who stays in houses because men with remarkable libraries and a tendency toward midnight conversations ask her to, and if the man in question intended to follow, to call on her in London through entirely proper channels, at an entirely reasonable frequency, with the specific intention of learning how to be the sort of person who might deserve to be called upon in return. That would be a different conversation." He reached out and took her hand. Gloved. Proper. The briefest, most correct contact, a formal press of fingers, the kind that said nothing at all in any language anyone else could read. But she felt it all the way up her arm. She felt it. She suspected, in ways she was going to have to address later. Alone? Somewhere private. "Then I'll have it. In London." He called on her on a Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and the Tuesday after that, with a book the third time, which she received with the same expression she used for most of his choices. A careful neutrality that covered, imperfectly, the fact that she was pleased. He noticed everything she tried not to show him. He was, by this point, very good at noticing her. She beat him at chess, on the 5th Tuesday 42 moves, efficient and merciless, which he had absolutely seen coming and had been looking forward to anyway. He sat with the board between them, and the particular expression of a man processing a loss with more pleasure than was sensible. Again, later, much later, when they had worked out what they were to each other and had stopped pretending they hadn't known for a very long time, she would ask him when he'd understood. He would think about it carefully, which was how he did everything. The second day, when you came to my door before dawn with someone else's threat in your hand and told me you weren't leaving, and when you moved, he would understand immediately. Outside, London moved around them, indifferent and vast and entirely unaware. Inside, two people who had each decided, separately and for entirely reasonable reasons, that warmth was not for them, were discovering, with a careful, stubborn thoroughness of people who take their time with the things that matter, that they had been wrong.